Hi, I'm Brian Buchwald, Global Chair of AI and Product at Edelman, and I want to welcome everyone to this Edelman AI webinar on brand visibility in the AI search era. Our inaugural AI Summit happened just 1 year ago, and since then, the impact of AI on our world has only accelerated. 1 year on, we're running an extended special edition of our webinar series, exploring how AI is transforming consumer behaviors and businesses. GenAI is being adopted faster than any transformative technology in modern history. This is having a dramatic effect on long-established consumer behaviors and markets. The specific trend that we're going to be focusing on today is the evolving search landscape. LLMs are beginning to transform how consumers discover information as AI search is increasingly taking share from search engines that have been dominant for so long. AI is also transforming our businesses. The nature of work will never be the same from this point forward as humans and digital robots will be collaborating side by side. Today, we will be exploring the industry context of how GenAI is changing the game for media and content creators. Then, we will be introducing GEOsight, our solution for helping brands take control in the era of AI search. Next, we will learn how AI transformation is happening in practice across the comms industry by gaining insights from experts in the field. And we will be ending with a Q&A. Please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A box in Zoom at any time. So what does this all mean for media and for brands and creators looking to navigate the evolving world of AI-driven search? Joining us today to discuss are Asa Heiken, tech reporter for Ad Age, and Alexia Adana, Director of Creative Technologies here at Edelman.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the introduction, Brian. Very excited to be here with you all. And this is a really topical and very interesting and nuanced conversation right now. And so, as somebody who works on the intersection of creativity, technology, design, and brand storytelling, I've been working really closely tracking how generative AI is reshaping how we create, but how people can discover and evaluate brands. At Edelman, we're building storytelling that is impactful, that is immersive. And in the media landscape, there's a lot to unpack what this means in the world of AI for media reputation and specifically its role of earned in this new landscape. So I'm excited to be joined by Asa Heiken, technology reporter at Ad Age. Ada, you've been recording the space very closely for quite some time, and I'm really looking forward to digging into where things are headed. So let's get started.
Yeah, sounds good. Great to be here.
Yeah, so as we know, there's been a lot of excitement and healthy skepticism around how AI is changing the way people discover information and content. And at this stage, we're at a place where brands are really starting to try to understand how they can leverage these tools to reach their audience, but also the nuances around transparency and how to maintain that trust as they're being discovered and sharing their stories. And so when you're reporting this, and even as if you step into the mind as a consumer yourself, where are you more so are leaning? Are you more in the excitement realm? Are you more on the skepticism realm? Are you somewhere in the middle? And how do you think brands should be approaching this as they start to navigate the unknowns?
I would say that I'm firmly in the middle ground. I would say firmly in the middle ground because I think that depending on which aspect of AI search you're looking at, there are going to be certain negative lights and certain positive lights. So the way that I have sort of spoken about this with brands and with other marketers is, trying to tease out, okay, what are the positive things that brands can kind of emphasize going forward, and how they integrate AI search and be a part of that, and mitigate those negative parts. And really I see the negative parts as being um, unwanted customization. I think that, like, a lot of marketers think that the more personalization, the better, but consumers don't want certain aspects of personalization. If sometimes, with super powerful AI, it has memory, it can remember all kinds of things from chats of, a year ago. Like, there are certain details that I think consumers might be a little freaked out by, and I think brands need to um, be aware of how powerful this technology is, and maybe using 100% of its power all the time isn't necessarily the consumer safe thing to do. I think there are also privacy issues as well. But on the positive side, I think that, AI search is really sort of creating a bespoke experience for consumers, right? I think that obviously the internet isn't one person's thing, but it's kind of creating like a little bubble for each consumer to, oh, this is how I'm searching. This is the AI knows these things about what I'm interested in, what I shop for, etc. And I think there's a really great opportunity to make this as positive an experience for consumers as possible. And I think brands showing up with deals, showing up in a positive way for consumers can ultimately elevate the experience.
Yeah, I totally agree. And one of the examples that I like to bring up in, the here and now is Reddit currently has a partnership with OpenAI where they're able to more in depth go through their different communities and kind of understand their consumers for their clients on a little bit of a deeper level. So they were speaking at a panel that I was at a conference a couple months ago, and they were saying they had one client that wanted to understand how their consumers in the plant industry were using AI. And they discovered an unexpected use case where people were using AI to take pictures of their plants or record videos of their plants to try to understand, like, how should I take care of this plant? What kind of plant is this? And so that client that was like they didn't really expect people to be using AI in that way. And so this is a form of search, if you will. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Is that a model that you think brands will continue to explore? How do you see that kind of insight of unexpected use cases of AI or unexpected use cases of your product coming up in search? How do you kind of see that evolving in specifically the AI search landscape as it continues to evolve?
Yeah, I I think that AI is probably best at finding those needle in a haystack moments, finding all these kinds of ways that your brand is showing up in spaces that you would otherwise have no idea you were showing up in, other than crawling every page on Reddit, um, you know, by yourself. So I think that these sort of discovery, like, oh, we're being talked about in this forum, this cohort is talking about us in this way. I think those moments of discovery are only going to increase. And you know, I I think that also the way that some of these platforms are integrating AI, sometimes I don't know if in that plant Reddit, maybe the consumers got all the information they needed from from other people, from the AI in that specific chat, and there's no room for brands to really leverage that. I think brands are going to have to decide which moments are we going to leverage to kind of show up and meet consumers. Because again, a platform like Reddit, why do people go on Reddit? To talk with other people, right? To talk with like-minded people, not necessarily to get bombarded by a brand. And I think other platforms are a little more brand friendly. And so really teasing out what are the right occasions for brands to show up in is going to be ever more important. Yeah, and you know, those moments of discovery, I think brands have to just kind of like keep their eyes open. You'll probably find your brand being talked about in a destination that maybe you had no idea people even knew your brand, right? Maybe on some obscure Tumblr page. So it's about keeping your eyes open, but also like not being too heavy-handed with the way you show up in these spaces, being selective and making sure that you're bringing you know, value and taking advantage of those moments in the right ways.
Yeah, totally. And it kind of going now into that actual experience and how that manifests as, earned media. So at the core of that is earning attention organically through providing some kind of experience for the consumer that they're just naturally gravitated towards, right? Like this is meaningful for me, or this is important for me. I actually want this information. So when we're thinking on that spectrum of experiencing something that feels exploitative, where it's like, I went on this, website, or I searched for this thing and now it's showing up on my TikTok for you, or now it's showing up in, and that's kind of the way that a lot of brands are currently advertising and trying to reach an audience, right? And a lot of people, we've seen like the everyday consumer isn't responding as positively to that, even though it might be something that they actually may want, right? So now on the other side of the spectrum, leveraging AI, and now brands are able to find these human truths and these kind of aha moments using AI in a way that they weren't able to do before. So on the other end of the spectrum, what are your thoughts on what does that look like in earned media that isn't exploitative, that feels more natural, that feels like I'm, as a consumer, like I'm okay with this experience,
Yeah, well, it's funny because right now I think a lot of brands are only able to show up in kind of an earned way in AI search, right? There's not really an ad network on ChatGPT, and Perplexity is just kind of getting their feet wet, and Meta is has signaled that it's going to include ads in its Meta AI app, but that could still be a year away. So what's left is you know, GEO, AEO, generative engine optimization, or answer engine optimization, however you like to call it. And that's kind of a just way, I think, of showing up right now, is because you can't really game the system like you can on SEO. You kind of have to give the AI what it needs in order to um, surface those results to consumers. And so what are those options right now? Like, you know, making sure that your website is very readable by AI. And that might include creating a TXT file layer to your website, if it's got a lot of images or videos, so the AI can crawl that and return that information. That also means providing more helpful information on your website that is geared towards user searches, right? Like this way, this marketing, because it is really marketing, that you are earning your sort of right to show up in those search results. And I think that as GEO, AEO kind of expands, there's going to be different ways to show up in those search results. I think, you know, I'm thinking about how Meta, in their Meta AI app, they released a social feed. And this is kind of opening the door for influencer marketing, or I would say influencer content showing up in these spaces, which ultimately opens the door to influencer marketing. That's another way of, you know, creators surfacing your brand to these users in these AI platforms. And those, of course, have to be very, they can't be too advertising, you know, they have to feel like they're giving value to the consumers. And that's why it's, at this point, it feels very much like brands should be leaning into helpful information that ultimately can show up in these search results for users. And that's kind of right now the process of discovery via AI search.
Yeah, and one thing, right now, we're leveraging influencers as a way to drive trust because we know they have an audience that look up to them and trust, their word and their opinions about these products. Now, in the world of social right now, and knowing that a lot of people are using social for search and also AI, there is a lot of potential misinformation. Like when it comes to transparency and trust and making sure that people can actually trust the information that they're seeing about a brand or what an influencer is telling them, you know, want to kind of explore how brands can, like, what are they doing to protect or build that trust with these tools, knowing that AI can hallucinate, knowing that there's a lot of, AI generated content right now on social. There's a new model out right now that is 100% indistinguishable from human generated content. So I think brands really need to be thinking about, yes, I want to leverage these technologies. This is going to really help with our storytelling, but how can I maintain the trust and transparency? And this is something, of course, we do at Edelman, and you'll hear a little bit more about GEO in the next segment, but would love to hear your thoughts on that topic specifically.
Uh, yeah, it's hard to really, I am just like everyone else, um, in trying to tease out what's real and what's not. I know that Google's new, uh, you know, content generation tools are pretty insane, and I think that it's really a double-edged sword, and brands will take advantage of that, but we're already seeing a flood of misinformation that's being spread by about brands, and whether or not they actually use AI tools, the AI zeitgeist is already influencing people in their receptions of this content. And so um, I think that kind of having a contingency plan, you know, I think maybe brands can actually, like, for the first time ever, take some advice from like the whole NFT boom of a couple years ago, because that was a space that was sort of filled with misinformation, filled with scams, but there were legit brands and legit companies that were involved there. And so on, like using platforms like X at the time, Twitter, and some other platforms, they had a protocol for being like, if you see anything that is posted about us that isn't from this account, don't trust it. It's not real. And they would kind of end every post saying that as a reminder, be like, don't trust what you're hearing that isn't from this profile. And I think that, like, taking that taking those steps seriously is, and probably taking them more seriously than you think, is better safe than sorry, because you don't want to have to be cleaning up a mess that, like, actually you didn't start, but it's still something that's fallen on your plate. So just making sure you have that contingency plan, and being prepared for some pretty compelling content that you didn't make.
Yeah, and I think what we were talking in our pre-call, we were talking about this kind of radical transparency as well. I think it is something that brands can do where it's like, we're in the age of AI, right? And we're going to be using it. We know you're using it. And so even some form of storytelling around the transparency of how brands are using AI, and even education of like, if we're creating something with AI, this is what it's going to look like. So you this is our, identity in the world of AI. So when you're looking at content and you're seeing what's out in the world, like, this is us versus what might be fake or what might be misrepresenting us or what might not be actually created by us. So even thinking about how to lean in to the realities and just be super transparent and open with the audience and their consumers as well.
Definitely. Yeah. I know that in advertising, companies love to the sort of love to surprise consumers, love to surprise people. Like, look at our brand new announcements, our brand new ad, never before seen or talked about, and that might have been a great mechanism in the pre-AI world, but maybe that isn't going to work as well in the AI world where people can spin up content so quickly. And it's good to kind of telegraph, like maybe doing some previews, like our next AI generated experiment is coming out next week. And this is sort of, without giving much away about the creative or what it looks like, these are the parameters to kind of get people ready for that, because I'm sure this week there's going to be an unannounced an obviously unannounced deepfake of someone or some brand or something that is going to really compel people. And if you lead with that transparency, if you sort of are willing to maybe be overly transparent for the sake of preserving the safety of your brand, I think that is okay. And maybe that's even optimal in this, especially on social media where all this content is both real and not real and somewhere in between.
100%, totally agree. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you, Asa. We could probably talk about this for hours, but I think that was a great conversation just around how generative AI is shaping the way that consumers are accessing information, evaluating information, deciding what they trust, and really moving into this landscape where discoverability isn't just driven by traditional search. And so brands, are needing to find new ways to approach their visibility, their credibility, and approach how they're going to earn people's trust in new ways. So that is the end of this part of the segment. Thank you so much for your perspective, and going to hand it over to Mirza and Patrick to introduce GEOsight, which is Edelman's new solution that's helping clients navigate the evolving world of AI search. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Alexia and Asa. That was an amazing conversation and so relevant to what we'll be talking about in this next portion of our presentation. Hi, everybody. My name is Mirza Jamovic. I'm the Senior Vice President of AI Solutions and Advisory here at Edelman. Later on in this portion of our presentation, I will also be joined by Patrick Kreisman, who is the Associate Director from our London technology team. We are so excited to be with you all today and to officially unveil our new AI search solution, GEOsight. GEOsight is Edelman's proprietary new framework for helping clients navigate and win in the era of AI-powered search. As large language models, or LLMs, as we'll refer to them, begin to replace traditional SEO-driven search behavior, we need new tools, new rules, and a new strategy. GEOsight puts control back in our clients' hands, making sure that their brand and enterprise is visible where it matters most, at the source of generative AI answers. If we go to the next slide, what we're seeing is a fundamental shift in user behavior. In traditional search, users type in a query and the search engine returns a page full of links. The responsibility is on the user to sift through those links, evaluate sources, click around, and piece together an answer. It's transactional and can often be very time-consuming. In AI-powered search, generative AI tools like ChatGPT and Microsoft Copilot and Google's Gemini give you answers, not just a list of web links. And this is a shift from information retrieval to information synthesis. The user asks a question and receives a contextual conversational response, often citing sources, summarizing complex topics, or even generating recommendations for users. And this shift matters because attention is moving from search engines to generative AI tools. And with it, brand visibility, influence, and trust are all being shaped by how well your brand shows up in these AI-generated outputs. So for communicators and marketers, the question is no longer just how do we rank on traditional search? It's also what do large language models say about us? And are we even showing up in the answer? And this visibility isn't just about ranking anymore. It requires a whole new kind of content strategy. And in this world, you can't simply buy your way to the top. LLMs don't respond to ad spend. They don't reward keyword stuffing. They reward authority. What influences visibility in LLMs is high authority content, earned media, expert mentions, credible third-party validation, and well-structured owned content. And that's why Edelman is so uniquely positioned to lead in this space. We've spent decades building these types of trusted narratives for our clients, and now we're evolving that expertise to meet this moment of AI search. And in fact, based on our experience with clients, we've seen that up to 90% of brand visibility in AI search engines can be driven by earned media alone. So the question isn't how do we rank anymore? It's are we considered credible enough to be cited by AI search tools? And GeoSight helps make that answer yes. Go to the next slide. Let's talk about Generative Engine Optimization, or GEO. This is the natural evolution of SEO, but instead of optimizing for traditional link-based algorithms, we're optimizing for large language models that power tools like ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, and Claude. The goal isn't traffic anymore, it's influence. GEO helps brands shape how they show up in generative answers, what's said, how it's said, and whether it's trusted. And instead of optimizing towards metrics like click-through rate and traffic volume and keyword ranking, we are now caring about visibility, share of voice relative to our competitors, and sentiment. How positive or negative are the outputs of these AI search platforms? And the strategies have also changed. It's less about metadata and technical optimization, though those are still requirements for GEO, and it's more about structured, authoritative content that's placed where LLMs actually look for information, credible media, earned media, and well-structured, owned, and organic content. If we go to the next slide, GeoSight is Edelman's approach to navigating this shift. It starts with listening. What is AI already saying about your brand? We use AI tools and human analysts to audit how visible, accurate, and positive your brand's representation is across large language model outputs. Then we move into strategy, increasing your share of answers by leveraging Edelman's earned media muscle and trusted relationships. Because if you're not mentioned in the sources that AI trusts, you're invisible on large language models. And finally, we focused on reputation. In an age where misinformation can go viral inside a chatbot response, we use multidisciplinary campaigns to reinforce the narratives that you want out there and course correct the ones that you don't. And how does all of this work? We start with baseline reporting. We do a scan of your current visibility, leveraging a proprietary prompting methodology that seeks to address what is the baseline for your brand across large language models. And we deploy a cross-functional approach, leveraging the deep expertise of Edelman's teams across data and insights, digital, crisis, and earned. Then we build a really strong content framework driven by both AI insights and cross-functional expertise that aligns with what LLMs prioritize in the outputs that they provide users. From there, we move into content development, pulling in our cross-functional teams to create the kind of assets, campaigns, and narratives that actually influence AI responses. And finally, content deployment, getting that material into the ecosystem and various channels in a way that LLMs ingest and can replicate and provide those outputs for users is critical. One of the most important elements of the GeoSight offering is placing content where LLMs actually look. We've worked with several clients that publish content at scale on their owned properties as well as on social channels. And oftentimes that content can go completely unnoticed by large language models, which is why it's so critical to both develop content that LLMs want to read, but also to place it where they're actually reading. And then finally, we wrap all of this up with a strong impact analysis, so we know exactly what's moving the needle. This is SEO for the new AI age, Generative Engine Optimization, and we're leading the change here by addressing what is actually moving the needle for driving visibility, improving sentiment, and positioning brands in a more positive and larger share of voice against their competitive set. This is an iterative process. It's not a one-time deployment, and it's a whole new channel that brands and clients need to adopt in order to get ahead of the changing course of search behavior away from traditional search engine results pages to AI search platforms. Joining me now is Patrick Kreisman, Associate Director on our London technology team and one of the key collaborators at Edelman on our GEOsight offering. He led our work with Akamai and is here to walk us through how we turned AI insights into a real-world strategy with this client. Patrick, welcome. So excited to have you here. Let's start with the big picture. What first brought Akamai to Edelman, and what challenge were they trying to solve with our GeoSight offering?
Yeah, hey Mirza, happy to be here. So just in case anyone on the call is not familiar, Akamai is a cloud and cybersecurity company based in Cambridge. They've been around for over 25 years now. I kind of like to think of them as sort of like the invisible infrastructure that keeps the internet going, keeps us safe, keeps us our web performance moving at lightning speed with low latency. So they're really important, and we've been working with them for over 4 years now. They're one of the they're quite an integrated program for Edelman. We work with them across earned, we have digital, social, creator, and so inherently in that we work both with the comm side of the house and the marketing side of the house. And over I guess it's the past 2.5 years now since the ChatGPT explosion, they've been really coming along with us on their AI journey and thinking about how this is going to impact both their company from a product development point of view, but also their comms and marketing department. So we've had several training sessions, educational sessions. We've been working with IP with them, that Edelman AI put together. And right around late last year, we had a training for their marketing team. And part of that was sort of starting to talk about the changing nature of search, how you need to think about your own content development, how that impacts earned and other third-party sources like you were talking about. And it kind of just organically went from there. I will say that their CMO, Kim Salem-Jackson, really likes to be ahead of the curve on this stuff. So she was really keen to kind of get an understanding of where Akamai sits right now with visibility on several of the LLMs we were able to look at, and kind of think about how she can action and integrate this into her program writ large.
Yeah, and once Akamai was on board for GeoSight, what did the discovery and audit process look like? What were some of the surprising insights that we uncovered?
Yeah, so the audit, the baseline report, I keep calling it an audit, the baseline report kind of captured 4 different areas. We wanted to see overall brand visibility, so how are they showing up in general on these LLMs? And then most, I thought, interestingly, keyword categories. So this is where we're really able to drill down into what matters most for each company. As you can guess, within Akamai, it's in their key product areas. And then we were able to, I can talk a little bit more about that. And then we kind of look into, okay, what content is actually being pulled? Are there any commonalities between each of the categories? Really trying to get a deep analysis there. And then, of course, our recommendations for sort of next steps at the end. As far as sort of the process of doing this, I think whenever you're bringing in a new team like Edelman AI, like DXI, our data intelligence arm, you really need to make sure that it's tightly integrated with the account team. So I worked really closely with the Edelman AI team on this. I think it's actually even more important with a company like Akamai. As you guys might be able to guess, it's quite technical. And so we're pulling across these 7 key categories. And it's not just like a couple dozen prompts for each one. It's hundreds, if not a couple of thousand prompts for each one. I kind of think about it like it's like the Inuit. Like there's 100 different ways to say snowflake. Like there's 100 different ways that you could ask the same question for these buyers when they're trying to understand more about what Akamai has to offer, what advantages or disadvantages do they have against key competitors. So it was kind of my job to go in there and look at all these prompts, make sure that they're accurately portraying the product set, and they're both kind of broad for the key categories they want to show up in, and then really narrow on some of these niche products that are really technical, and make sure we're asking the questions the right way that a potential buyer would ask. I think you asked as well, kind of thinking about some of the more surprising elements. I can speak to that. as much as like we know that they're pulling from earned, I was still impressed and surprised that earned was driving so many of these citations. It made me feel very good about my job and my long-term career. And the sort of, without getting into too much of the specifics about which outlets it pulled, it was a pretty wide variety. It's some of the ones that you would expect within sort of the cloud, the AI, the cyber realm. And then there's some that I was like, oh man, like those aren't really on our kind of key radar for these are the outlets we're pitching all the time. And we kind of wanted to reconsider our strategy after that, right? Like if these are the ones where they're pulling from, we want to make sure that we're giving them our up-to-date news, we're getting them some thought leadership, they have access to the right brand story for Akamai, the most up-to-date news, and so that will then translate back into the LLM and keep it current.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember going through that process, and I remember you seeing the first report and saying, "Oh wow, that was not on our radar, but now it is," which is great. And then going from those insights to then developing action, how did we build the content and earned media strategy and framework to address some of the gaps or perhaps surprising insights that we uncovered?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think that there was a couple of areas that we were really collaborative with Akamai on because when you look at the key category output, right? Like there's some that they are doing really well in. There's some where it's like a little iffy, like, oh, we want to make sure that we keep going strong here and make sure that we have more visibility than competitors. And then there's some that needed more work. None of those, I would say, were totally surprising. They kind of aligned with where they are on their journey as a company in terms of they have a more mature product area or they've, started putting out some new products in this area and they really need to double down on it. So we kind of talked to them through what, not just there's some top line recommendations, things you can fix today. So it was like day one actions. And then it's like, okay, well, what does a campaign look like that is a couple months long so that you can think about how do you improve this long term? And then how we can kind of benchmark and measure against this in the future. So it was a kind of variety of what they were potentially able to do, and we were kind of guiding them through that, and then they were able to select from there what they wanted to invest their time and money in.
Absolutely. And finally, what do you think was the most valuable outcome for Akamai from engaging Edelman on GeoSight, and what can other brands and clients take away from this example?
I think it goes back to this isn't just living and dying on LLMs. This really is a feeding into all of your marketing and your comms organization. They have been educating with our findings to their various departments within Akamai, so within PR, within content development, within marketing and paid, to show them where we are showing up currently in LLMs, where we need to work on it, and then where those sources are, right? Those third-party earned sources or analyst sources that they really need to make sure that they are showing up in positively. So that to me is like so fundamental to their entire strategy as a firm, right? And it shows that this isn't just something that's like, oh, it's like in the background. Like it is very fundamental to the entire company and to the marketing and comms organization.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Patrick, for joining us today and providing your perspective on the experience that we had working with Akamai on developing their GeoSight and AI search content strategy. I think it was a wonderful experience and so happy that you were able to join to share some of that with the audience today. So thank you.
Thanks, Mirza.
Absolutely. All right, it concludes this section of our presentation. Next, I'm going to pass it over to some colleagues from the Edelman AI team, including Tom Campbell, Megan Nelson, Hong Chia, and also Nathalia Martins from our healthcare team to talk about how AI is transforming communications. Over to you.
Thank you, Mirza, Patrick. Such a great case study and exciting new frontier for all of us in the communication space. So really appreciate it. And hey, everybody, I'm Tom Campbell, SVP of Product Strategy and Consulting here on the Edelman AI team, pushing forward our AI, internal transformation efforts forward within the firm. In just a moment, as you see on the screen, I'll be kicking off a conversation with a few of the primary architects and executors of our transformation approach at Edelman, so we can really dig into what we've been trying to accomplish lately, as well as the bumps in the road we've faced along the way that I'm sure many of you attending are also experiencing, as we all embark on our AI journeys lately. Before that, though, I think it's really helpful to ground ourselves in what we call the AI maturity curve, which we'll talk to in just a second. As you see here on the slide, especially in our current rush to start implementing AI into everyone's business immediately, we find that much of the essential buildup to the AI solutions that can actually bring real value to your business can often get sort of lost in that race to the finish line, if you will, at the end of this curve that you see. But the reality is that every shortcut that we take earlier in this maturity curve will come to rear its head at some point later down the road. So as you're thinking about bringing AI solutions into your organizations, we really encourage, as we've been trying to do for ourselves, to start by considering, as you see here in sort of stage one around educating your people, how AI ready is your organization today? What forms of governance already exist, if any? And what safeguards are we going to need to put in place to even use any AI tooling at all, so that we really have the foundation to move into these later stages, like, for example, in stage 2 with enabling process, in tool selection enablement, what tools are right for your needs? Do you need access to foundational LLM models? Is it point solutions for specific needs, that there are specific tools that can really help with that individually? Is it both? Why? And what are all these things intended to accomplish together, right? How is that going to lead to true workforce transformation for you and your organization? And then finally, that can head into the last stage, which is where we're all very excited to get to, of evolving that technology of, okay, now what can we really build and integrate into our teams that transform how we do our work, bring the proprietary data and thinking and IP that we might have within our organization into those tools, and ultimately design custom tooling that will best suit our needs for our organization specifically, and really bring out all that proprietary value that makes whatever makes your organization tick. And so obviously looking at all of this, right, we know very well at Edelman how much of a daunting task this can all feel like, especially to a communications professional who isn't necessarily an AI technology expert. And so in order to really land the plane, it requires this balancing act across the people in your organization, the process you take them through, and then, of course, the technology that is built and provided. And so with some of that backdrop, I'd love to now introduce some of our esteemed panel of speakers who can talk in a lot more detail around how we've been operationalizing our transformation efforts and how we're trying to move Edelman further and further up this curve over time. So you heard a little bit brief introduction, but just to reintroduce everybody and their titles, you have Megan Nelson here, our SVP of Customer Experience, who's really taking all the teams through all of these pieces of their transformation. Hong Zhao, our fearless AI solutions build lead, and Natalia Martins, who is a VP on our corporate health team and one of our esteemed AI leads, taking all of her teams through as well. Hey, everybody, and would love to dive right in with you all. Maybe, Megan, with kind of that broader backdrop of what this all looks like, as an architect of all of this and kind of the primary point of contact for our teams throughout, maybe you can just start us off by giving us an overview of the transformation process we've designed and how we're kind of pushing that through the org.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tom. And really excited to be here to kind of walk everybody through this. So, process is not generally the most glamorous part of the job, right? But so critical. So over the past few months, we've really created a very structured process. The reason being, we didn't want to just kind of throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks, right? We didn't want to just implement AI for AI's sake. We really wanted to take a deliberate and focused strategic approach to understanding all of the work being done and where AI was the best fit to create a higher level strategic deliverables for our clients. Really taking a client first thought process and approach here, knowing that the landscape of AI tools is ever evolving as well, right? We wanted to focus on where can we start with current state tools and what will we develop into? And then to your point as well, how do we best work with our teams, the people across this entire firm, to put that in place? Our team here on the AI side of things, we are by no means the experts in all of the client work being done and how it's delivered to clients. So we really had to partner closely, and I think collaboration was the name of the game. So first, we started with a formal kickoff aligning with the strategic account leaders, getting them really excited about this idea that their accounts would be brought through this process to up level, upskill their employees, and ultimately, like I said, up level those deliverables. We then asked for AI leads to be identified as part of the process. And I think this was really critical. Natalia was one of our AI leads in this process. But this team of AI leads really acted as our embedded folks within the account teams that we could work with to truly understand the work. They became extensions of our AI team. They went through a lot of rigorous AI training to become really, really empowered to enable their accounts, but also to push back on us and say, well, we do things this way and here's why, and maybe AI doesn't fit in the way you're thinking, or maybe it does. So it was a lot of that collaboration as we worked with the AI leads and account leaders to really understand the workflows and where it could make a difference. So we went through very carefully, workflow by workflow, understanding all of the work being done, and then created a strategic plan. So we identified where AI could be effective, what tools specifically, and where within the process they should be implemented. A lot of that did involve some custom tools being built. So these teams had kind of build periods where our team was building some of those custom solutions out. And then it was really back to that collaboration approach to make sure that we enabled across the entire group of account teams, so the work could really be implemented, the AI could be implemented in the delivery of work.
Absolutely. And as you're speaking to, Megan, like we've definitely found just so crucial to be bringing the whole team through that process. And obviously, Natalia, as one of our AI leads, really helping to guide those teams through that process. How would you kind of characterize the whole experience of implementing all those pieces across an account?
Sure, thanks, Tom. I think I would categorize it by saying there was a little bit of a mix. So a little bit of a mixture of excitement, a little bit of hesitation too, right? So it's new, and with change comes hesitation. So I would say some of our younger colleagues were particularly really thrilled to see how the technology works and how it's really amazing at kind of streamlining some of the more menial tasks and even kind of up leveling and strategizing on some of the more complex tasks as well. I would say where I saw a little bit of more hesitation was with our senior team members. And so they definitely were a little bit more skeptical, I would say, to implement the tools, and also more quick to kind of disengage when they saw that perhaps the tools were not performing to the level that they expected. So that happened a little bit too. But I would just say overall, there was a little bit of a general fear of AI being just one more thing to add on to the day, right? We're all strapped for time. There's a lot going on, long to-do list. And so with the learning curve, I think folks were a little bit like, one more thing to squeeze into my day. So that is definitely something that kind of saw across the board from the outset.
Absolutely. And maybe to sort of like double click and follow up on that. And obviously, Megan, Han, chime in on any of this. In addition, what were some of those like challenges that people were bringing up that were kind of leading to some of that hesitancy in particular? I'm sure lots on the call are kind of experiencing the same thing. And what kind of strategies worked well to overcome any of that?
Yeah, so I think from my perspective, it was the biggest challenge was a mindset shift required to really get folks on board. And so I think that, growing up, going through school, right, we were taught that, you're not allowed to use tools. That, we took tests, we couldn't use calculators, we couldn't even use books, right? And so now it's like, oh, well, your boss is telling you that you need to use this tool. And so I think there's a little bit of a fear that folks are maybe cutting corners or using this as a crutch. And so that mindset shift of, am I going to be judged for this? Am I going to be replaced here? That is something that really was loud and clear. And I think that to address that, there were a couple of things that we kind of try to implement through the process. And I think first is just really strong executive sponsorship. I think that's critical. So, having leadership really communicate, the expectation that folks adopt this technology, I think is key to level set. And then also just to set the tone, right? Like they need to convey to people that, AI is really here to support your work, not to replace you. So when that kind of top down, communications come through loud and clear, I think that makes, folks rest a little bit at ease. And then the other thing too that you talked about, Tom, is just inviting teams in to co-create. I think that, once we were able to bring in folks to really kind of let them co-create their use cases and give them some ownership of the process, that really was helpful in reducing resistance.
Yeah, and just to kind of tack onto that as well, definitely hearing the trying something new, right? People get a little bit set in their ways. This is how I've always done something. So there's always that little bit of mentality of getting people on board with trying something new, especially a new tool, right? Like AI 10 years ago did not exist in this way. 2 years ago, it didn't exist in the way that it exists today. So really a matter of getting people to adopt something that's new and ultimately, for lack of a better term, scary in that sense. So one thing I tried to work on while I was chatting with teams is being vulnerable, like sharing successes, but also share failures. Also share, hey, I tried this with AI and it didn't work. Did this work well for anybody else? Did you approach it differently? I know that I'm very spoiled that I get to sit on a team of AI experts, but not everybody has that at their disposal. So kind of sharing all the successes and failures and asking for help where needed, I think also helps kind of demystify these new tools.
I couldn't agree more with all of that in terms of we're all figuring this out together. Even those of us with the technical background are kind of figuring this out. And it's so helpful to kind of come at it in that human sense and really ground in what the teams are doing. And maybe as we kind of talk about that co-creation process, a great spot to bring you in, Hong, who are you leading all of these building efforts. Like as you're actually going in and building with these teams and helping them construct the things that'll, transform their work with AI, how are you approaching that, and how are you kind of bringing the teams into that co-creation process with you?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So I think when we think about what's really making these collaborative build efforts successful, from our experiences, it really comes down to three things. It's about picking the right battle, collecting the right input, and designing the right build. To double click into them, picking the right battle really means being really honest about which workflows are actually AI ready and not to force AI into everything and too much prematurely. So in our cases, we look for repeatable, high volume, high context, and text-based tasks where AI can really make a dent. That's usually where our signal to go. And then secondly, input collection is really everything here. The best way to improve model performance isn't just about prompting. It's probably just about giving the AI good data, clear examples, as well as context it can really work with. This might really mean, sharing passive outputs, explaining internal logic, or just labeling things really, really well for AI to really understand, how do we create differentiated offerings. So it will be an investment for sure, and people will 100% feel it, but ultimately it will be worth it. And then obviously, finally, designing the right build means getting really surgical with the design. So this includes writing the right prompts, injecting the right knowledge, and then running enough testing and iterations to guide the model towards the team's expectations. And this is really where the co-creation, I would say, comes in. It's not just AI engineers behind the curtain at the end of the day. It's all about the subject matter experts in the room as well, and collectively shaping ultimately how AI thinks and behaves.
Absolutely. I really love the way that you're sort of framing up, right? Like how we need to kind of communicate with teams and work with them to see what that North Star is going to be helps make kind of all the work that definitely needs to go into it worth it. And maybe, even thinking outside of our own building efforts, but obviously as we've seen together, what are some of those common gaps that you see kind of preventing people from being able to achieve that full potential of these AI solutions? And how do we kind of think about addressing that when we're trying to partner up?
Yeah, I would say the biggest gap is probably, the communication mismatch between the human and AI right now. So the way, we think about it is that AI is almost like this really smart student, and the teams and subject matter experts are really the teachers, right? But the twist here is really, even though they're in the same room and they're, effectively speaking different languages and don't really know what each other really wants. So this is really where things tend to break down. The AI is ready to sprint. It can generate content, often over-generates to the point of hallucination, and then it's ready to analyze patterns, give suggestions, but without the right framing and context, it ultimately becomes a lot of the guesswork. So what we think really, the unlock is about taking a step back and asking, what do we really want the AI to do? What context does it need? How do we give it clear, structured input that reflects how we think? So things like, turning a messaging framework into prompt templates, breaking down audience insights into short labeled examples, even building like glossary of brand tone, even just like annotating gold standard outputs. So the model knows exactly what we mean by great or differentiated output would look like. These are all things that are super helpful, I think, in this case. And once teams start doing that, they're not just using AI as a tool anymore. They're really training it to think more like themselves. And then they're also training themselves as well, right? To be able to better work with AI. And that's usually when the moment where, AI integration starts to feel more and more impactful and seamless.
Absolutely. I mean, Megan, Natalia, obviously jump in if you have any thoughts specifically on the build side of that. But I think otherwise we can kind of maybe just expand this out and maybe Megan, starting with you, like what kind of obviously I think it resonates very well what Hong is bringing up of everyone on this webinar has so many different pieces to their business. As Edelman, we know very well that we're trying to do this across so many different work streams and work types and industries and clients, et cetera. Like what learnings have we sort of taken away from all this work that might be valuable for everybody to think about as they're trying to better integrate AI into their business?
Yeah, I think for me, it's really taking the time during that workflow review process. So as you're really analyzing the work that you're trying to make changes to, making sure that you're giving it its time and due diligence. We walked teams through and we asked questions about what are you doing, but so many of our team members are such experts in what they do, right? They do it every day. And when you think about a task that you do every day, you don't necessarily think about every step. Somebody asks you to walk through your morning routine, you might say, I brush my teeth, but you don't say, I put the toothpaste on the toothbrush and then I put the toothbrush in my mouth. So really making sure that you're taking time to like massage out that level of detail so that you can make the tools as specific as possible. So I think what we found is, oftentimes people were just jumping through what they do because it's such second nature. So really making sure to take the time and go through with that fine-tooth comb, every single detail, mini step by mini step, to make sure that we can understand the best ways to approach it as we're building new tools.
Absolutely. And how about for you and the client teams, Natalia? What kind of other learnings would you pile on top of that? And how would you kind of advise other leaders as they're thinking about, all the diversity of what they might need to accomplish and where AI could be pointed? Like, how have we thought about that with our teams?
Yeah, Tom, I think, one big insight that I took away is that there was a lot of skepticism that stemmed from kind of initial first attempts. And so what I would say is, start with the straightforward, right? There's obviously a lot that the technology can do for us, but I think that, when folks kind of had to go through the iteration process, they started to lose a little bit of confidence, and we don't want that to happen from the get-go, right? And so start with a little bit of more the straightforward tasks, show those light bulb moments, because that was really big when people really saw, wow, this is what this can do for me in my day-to-day. It just sparked an interest, and that's where we really saw the adoption picking up. So start with a little bit more straightforward, build the confidence of the team, how comfortable they are with using the technology, and then go into the more complex from there. I think that's one big takeaway from me. The other is don't mandate from the top. We definitely want to have executive communication, but bring in the teams from the get-go. I think once you let folks really like test, explore, kind of shape how the AI works for them and their day-to-day workflows, that's when you really see the teams become more engaged. And then last but not least, be patient. I think it's what Megan was talking about. This is new technology. Transformation takes time. And then once I think people see the value of it, the momentum just naturally builds from there.
100%. I love the point about the top down and really because I think what we find is not only for the purposes of how we communicate and work with the teams, but so much of the innovation and ideas come from the bottom up. Is these are the people who are honestly using AI more and more in their everyday lives, but are kind of thinking already about how they can be stitching it into their work kind of more proactively. So absolutely, like love all of that thinking. Unfortunately, we all talk about this stuff all day long, every day, and I'm sure we could keep going for forever. I think that's all the time we've got. But thank you all for all the insight here. I'm sure it's been immensely helpful for everyone to hear as we all embark on this AI journey. So thanks again, and back to you, Brian.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Megan and Hong and Natalia. That was great. We're going to move on now to the Q&A portion. We've had a lot of really good and challenging questions shared with us. So I thought I would dive into those, and I will call on team members to answer. But if somebody else has a better answer, please feel free to jump in as well. So why don't we start at the top? First question, is the user adoption of these products due to users actually consistently using them, or simply because the platforms are forcing them in front of users? Not sure. I want to break that apart, but I think the question is, are employees using these products because they're seeking them out, or are they using them because they're being forced to use them? Maybe I'll jump on that one. And I think the shortest answer is there's recent analysis done by our McKinsey, where they looked at a group of engineers, and they looked at a group of engineers at a company that were using AI and a group that wasn't using AI. And what they found was a 40% improvement in output from the engineers who were using AI relative to those who weren't using AI. What was particularly interesting about the study is when they actually double-checked the data, they realized that those engineers using AI were actually already their best engineers and were producing higher quality and more commits to their code than those who hadn't been using AI. So even prior to the introduction of AI, that cohort was the best group. So actually, when they took out the employee quality effect, it was actually only about 12% improvement from the use of AI. So what I would say is, and I think we're seeing this at Edelman and at a number of our clients, those employees who are seeking out AI, who are experimenting with it and bringing it into their work, are getting to the best possible place. Those that are essentially being forced to use it and are recalcitrant in doing so definitely run the risk of being left behind. Mirza, I got a couple questions for you. What tools are available to clean up narratives within the AI platforms? How do we think about that?
That is a great question. And the answer is it's not a tool that's going to clean up the narrative about your brand within an AI search platform. You leverage tools to understand how your brand shows up as a baseline on these AI search outputs from a visibility, share of voice, and sentiment perspective. When we identify that there is a negative sentiment attached to a certain brand or product or narrative that that brand cares about, then you have to develop a content structure and deploy that content in the areas that LLMs actually fall to mitigate the narrative that you're seeing show up, or to shape the narrative in a more positive light based on the brand's preferences. You can, of course, leverage off-the-shelf AI tools to help you develop that content strategy, but we would recommend partnering with experts like our teams at Edelman to develop that content strategy so that it really targets and develops the narrative that the brand cares about.
Mirza, I'm going to ask you another question. If you could actually just stay leaned into the microphone, just for audio quality. How do you determine those prompts are what a buyer is actually asking?
Yeah, absolutely. So we determine prompts to reflect buyer intent through a few different methods. We have a proprietary prompting methodology that mines large volumes of anonymized prompts to identify recurring themes. Questions that compare products, ask for reviews, or seek pricing all signal buying behavior. And we leverage human reviews to help interpret those nuances and map prompts back to buyer journeys. We also have access to real-time searches and patterns, and we track how users are actually phrasing questions in AI search tools and compare that against patterns from traditional search, looking for signs for informational consideration or transactional intent, which leads to behavioral buying signals.
Thank you, Mirza. I'm going to jump on the next one from Hannah, which is Duolingo just faced a lot of backlash for addressing their use of AI. How do you balance that transparency with consumer concern or avoiding sounding tone deaf? Just a couple thoughts here. The first is through the recent AI Trust Barometer report into innovation and into the specific questions about AI and consumer trust in AI. One of the primary leverage points that brands had was convincing consumers that they would use AI responsibly, but also competently. And the competency element was actually the greatest, essentially, flipping point between those who didn't trust AI and those that do trust AI. So I think as organizations, our best position is to be as transparent as possible with consumers, with the marketplace, but doing so from a position, obviously, of competency. The second point that I'd make here in terms of sounding tone deaf and not understanding consumer needs is also to respect privacy. Right? So there are certain guidelines that we put in place at Edelman around data security, around personally identifiable information, et cetera. Putting in place the right governance and compliance frameworks at the outset puts you in a position to lessen the likelihood of ever running into one of these challenges. Megan, a question for you. How do you analyze for whether AI is actually helpful or improving matters or not?
Yeah, I probably glossed over this part a little bit too quickly when I was going through the process. Like I said, you do the same process over and over again. You tend to forget steps or gloss over some of them. But impact tracking is a huge part of what we're doing. So our goal here is to create efficiencies in the more tactical steps of the process so that it frees up time for strategic thinking. So we're really looking at it in two ways. The first is the quantitative, right? Doing some tracking on how we've improved those efficiencies through the more tactical steps, but then through more qualitative feedback about the improvements seen in the end product based on freeing up that time for more strategic thinking, more strategic input. So that's a really key step to how we're closing out the process and making sure that what we are delivering is impactful.
To that end, Megan, what if the tool is actually is cutting corners or lowering the output quality or making the work take longer?
Don't use it. No, in all seriousness, that is part of the tracking, right? We don't want to create anything that doesn't make sense. Our team has a set of foundational tools that are standard across the org. One of the first things we did as we were doing some of the workflow mapping and strategic design of the plan is mapping out where these foundational standard tools fit in. No need to recreate the wheel and create a tool that doesn't need to be made. So using the tool that fits, but then through feedback, understanding if it is making things take more time, understand that maybe in the short term, as people are getting comfortable with new tools, it might be a little bit more time in the learning curve and then reducing time. But if that's truly not the case, if it really is just adding a step for the sake of adding a step or decreasing the quality of the deliverable, we've asked teams to be incredibly transparent about that with us and push back and say, no thanks to that particular tool or solution. Quite frankly, so far we haven't seen any places where it's necessarily certainly not taking us more time. But if it's decreasing the quality of the work, we don't want that either. So really making sure that we're getting that feedback from the teams that we're working with.
Megan, I'm going to keep you on the hot seat. What size data sets do you find are needed to make all this work effectively? How do you avoid overfitting problems?
Yeah, that's a great question. So again, going back to if we've already got a standard tool for a solution, going with that tool, no need to over-engineer it. But when it comes to data needed to create new or custom tools, again, I don't think it's one size fits all. It really depends. We're looking at the level of specificity that we need to get into, whether it's kind of creating custom audience models, right? And we might want to pull in some survey research and some psychographic research to understand different audience models, right? That could be an input. It could be, a series of deliverables that we've already created in the past that would help to guide what future deliverables should look like. So if you do overload a tool with too much data, right, it can confuse the tool, it can slow it down, it can create hallucinations. So there is a fine line to walk there. But again, I just don't think it's one size fits all. I think it's really understanding the problem you're trying to solve and the data needed to solve that problem.
Mirza, I'm going to return to you with a couple more questions related to GEO. How do you cope with retrieving content from behind publication paywalls when you're measuring LLM visibility, i.e., not on the public web?
So that's a great question, because when you look at the types of partnerships that large language models and providers like OpenAI are engaging with, they're actually engaging in licensing agreements with major media publications like Condé Nast or Vox, the Financial Times, for example. And what those licensing agreements enable is for those large language models, unlike traditional search engines, it enables them to crawl content behind the paywall. And what that means is that you naturally develop a hierarchy in terms of the type of media outlets that you should be pitching from your brand relating to certain product launches or narratives that you care about. And that's just one element of the content and pitching strategy that should come out of a strong GEO strategy. You should focus on outlets that do have licensing agreements with these major providers, only if these large language models are crawling those providers specific to your industry, to your brand, or the topics that you care about. We've seen a lot of clients come to Edelman and ask questions like, can you give us a list of the media outlets that have basic licensing agreements with large language models so that we can start pitching them to ensure that we show up in AI search outputs? That is not necessarily the right strategy, nor will it lead to a shift in your visibility or sentiment, because it's entirely possible that while those licensing agreements exist, that the LLMs are not crawling those specific publications for your brand. So it's really important to establish that baseline benchmark of visibility, and also to understand where LLMs are citing information relating to your brand. The probability is higher that they will be citing from content behind a paywall because of these licensing agreements, because of the way that LLMs prioritize the content. But it's super critical to have a data-informed GEO strategy. Otherwise, you may be mismanaging your resources.
Mirza, I'm going to hit you with a more philosophical question. This is an interesting one. If press releases remain relevant, do you think that the structure will change to be more of a Q&A format? If so, should brands drive that change, or should we wait for a signal or level of comfort from journalists? And if we shouldn't be changing the way we are formatting distributed releases, should we be posting a Q&A version on brand sites?
That is a great question. And it is philosophical, but it's also rather tactical as well. I was recently having a conversation on another webinar about the role of the press release in the era of AI search. And one of the great ways of thinking about press releases in this new era is that they can kind of become the nucleus, if you will, of your GEO content strategy. And what I mean by that is the press release is obviously the major conduit to getting really strong earned media pickup and mentions, right? That's what journalists receive, what they read, process, and then eventually what gets into a story. Now, the way that you structure your press releases from an AI search perspective can be done in a few different ways. AI search platforms love answers. They love answers to problems. They love answers to things that plague brands or users. And so if you can structure your press releases to provide answers to problems that are specific to your brand, to your industry, and that gets picked up by the journalist, that will improve the readability of that content by large language models. That's one element. The other element is that you can actually begin segmenting your press releases based on the solution or answer that you're offering for the identified problem. And you can segment those press releases to different outlets so that you can establish better and more niche authority within the topics and narratives that you care about, which will improve the probability of you getting picked up by large language models. The third element here is that you should absolutely be creating ancillary content for any earned media pickup that you're getting relating to your core public narratives or products, because that will improve your chances of getting picked up by large language models, because you've already got that first layer of authority from the earned media pickup, and you can then drive volume on your owned channels as well as on non-operated social channels to drive increased probability of visibility as well as positive sentiment.
Great. Megan, I'm gonna leave the last couple with you. How important do you feel domain knowledge of the client space is to developing appropriate solutions that meet not only delivery, but regulatory, legal, compliance, data protection issues, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a great question. So again, we've got very standard things that we do across Edelman day in and day out, and those can be solved by a standard set of tools. For anything more customized, and having that account knowledge, that's where we really do rely on the collaboration with the teams that have that deep knowledge. When it comes to legal compliance, data compliance, et cetera, obviously we take that very, very seriously. Making sure that we're understanding any and all, whether it's industry level or client level nuance to legal requirements in their space. So we work very closely with the account teams. As I said, our team, the AI team, is a smaller team, and we work across the entirety of the firm. So we really do rely on our partners on the account team to bring that information to us so that we can have that deep understanding and make sure that we are A, developing the right tools, and B, developing compliant tools and working within the standards that our clients require and expect.
So, Megan, I'm going to leave you with the last question. What is the best way to learn more about Edelman's AI strategies from a technical standpoint? How does development differ for an emerging technology and landscape?
Yeah, absolutely. Reach out to your account team. We partner very, very closely with all the account teams, as I mentioned. So we're happy to hop on the phone and have more tailored discussions around, your company, your needs, what you're looking to do. Our team is consistently crafting custom solutions, again, not only for our own internal use and how our teams work, but we also have solution offerings that we offer out to our clients as well. So please let your account team know. They'll loop in myself, Mirza, another member of our go-to-market team, and we're happy to join those conversations to learn a little bit more about what you're trying to do and talk a little bit more about our offerings.
Great. For those questions that we were not able to address directly live on the call, we will look to answer after the call and send out as part of the webcast. So if you asked a question, we will definitely do our best to get back to you with an answer, even if you are anonymous. With that, I want to say thank you to everyone who joined us today, and thank you to all of our fantastic speakers for this insightful discussion on the transformative power of AI and its accelerating impact on how information is being created, surfaced, and discovered. What we're witnessing together isn't just disruption, it's a redefinition. AI is no longer just a tool for consumers, it's becoming a trusted advisor. For brands, content creators, and communicators, this shift means AI is now a strategic stakeholder, one that must be engaged intentionally, consistently, and ethically. We heard today how the rise of AI-generated search is upending long-standing rules of the game, from how media is valued to how brands show up in digital discovery. This is not a moment for small tweaks. It's a call for bold adaptation. Staying relevant in this new landscape means being proactive, being vigilant, and always evolving. At the same time, the erosion of familiar signals raises new and complex questions about trust. Which voices will carry authority in an AI-driven world? How will trust differ across geographies, cultures, and platforms? These are questions communicators must be ready to answer and to shape. At Edelman, we're proud to be at the forefront of this shift, advising some of the world's most iconic organizations as they navigate the intersection of technology and communications. Through innovations like our new GEO solution, we're helping brands not only keep pace with change, but to lead it, while staying grounded in the core value that's always defined our collective work: trust. I'm incredibly excited for what lies ahead and for the opportunity to keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in this AI-powered future, together with our clients, with our partners, and with all of you. Thank you.